Don't let the cook interfere with the planning table. She's here to make sandwiches." The entire room erupted in laughter. A young officer even whistled when he saw the small woman carrying a food tray walk in. But when the screen displayed video of Bravo unit under ambush, she suddenly clenched her fists. Her eyes changed color. "That's my unit." And the entire room fell into immediate silence. Her name was Julia Rains, 30 years old, European descent, long brown hair tied back neatly, soft, calm eyes, small frame. Julia was the cook at Phoenix-based logistics center, specializing in serving special operations units returning for resupply. Every day she woke up at 4 a.m., prepared hundreds of meals, personally carried food to both the medical bay and command center. She wore no military rank, never spoke about her past, always quiet. But she always wore a silver chain with an old military tag whose letters had faded. The young soldiers often joked, probably her ex-boyfriend's tag. Maybe she used to cook on the front lines, that's why she has it. Some called her Miss Sandwich, both to tease her and to show they were better than her. Julia never reacted. She just bowed her head, worked, and disappeared behind the small kitchen. Until one day, while carrying a food tray into the operation briefing room, Julia stepped in right when Bravo Team's tactical map was being displayed. When a lieutenant whistled mockingly at her, Julia said nothing, but when she looked up at the screen, her eyes stopped. Live footage from a drone showed 3 soldiers trapped under heavy fire, one of whom she immediately recognized. The tactical display showed coordinates, enemy positions, and casualty reports, the kind of information that determined who lived and who died. Julia's hands trembled slightly as she set down the tray. The silver chain around her neck caught the light from the projector, revealing just enough of the faded text to make someone wonder. In that moment, standing between the laughing officers and the screen showing her people in danger, Julia faced a choice: stay silent and invisible, or reveal who she really was. The drone footage continued streaming. Radio chatter filled the room with desperate calls for backup. And Julia, the woman they called Miss Sandwich, stared at the screen knowing exactly what those coordinates meant. She had been there before. Type: don't judge anyone by the apron they wear, if you've ever seen someone skilled being overlooked just because of their appearance. On screen, drone footage with text reading Bravo Team Last Contact 417. Julia stepped forward. An officer was about to switch to the next slide when she spoke up. "Wait! Don't turn it off!" The briefing room fell silent. Julia pointed at one soldier on screen. "That guy's name is Evans. I once carried him out of Fog Hill, when blood wouldn't stop flowing from his stomach." Lieutenant Colonel Lawton frowned. "How do you know his name?" Julia removed her silver chain, held up the faded tag, Rains, J, RCN, 457, Tactical Recovery Unit. The assistant checked the system, surprised. "Sir, she used to belong to Raven 9, Tactical Recovery Unit, disbanded after the Battle of Hill 17. Lofton looked at Julia longer. She didn't avoid his gaze. Julia spoke clearly. "I'm the only survivor from that battle, and Evans is a soldier I once saved." The entire room fell completely silent. No one was joking anymore. Julia continued. "Bravo is being cornered in exactly the old trap pattern. If you keep using the new satellite maps, you'll lose them." The tactical display showed standard approach routes, the kind taught in modern warfare academies. Clean lines on digital maps that looked perfect in theory. But Julia knew better. She had walked those valleys when they were soaked in blood. She had crawled through those rocks when bullets were flying overhead. A lieutenant spoke up. "So, what do you want to do?" Julia walked straight to the screen. She drew the Northern Stone Tunnel withdrawal route, a path once used for recovery operations. Her finger traced routes that weren't on any current map. Emergency extraction points that had been classified and forgotten. Hidden caches that could mean the difference between life and death. She paused. "I can't give orders, but I remember that route, and I'll go." The room remained silent. Officers exchanged glances. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't how operations were supposed to work. But on screen, 3 soldiers were pinned down. Radio chatter was getting weaker, and time was running out. Julia stood between 2 worlds. The safe world of the kitchen, where she could hide behind her apron and pretend the past didn't exist, and the dangerous world of tactical operations, where people she cared about were dying. Lieutenant Colonel Lawton studied her face. He saw something there, something that reminded him why certain people earned the right to wear certain badges. The last official record shows Raven 9 was disbanded due to classified circumstances, he said slowly. Julia's jaw tightened. Official records don't always tell the whole truth. Type, I recognize my people if you believe there are connections that never disappear, even when erased from reports. The base equipped a small helicopter. Julia put on her old combat gear, slightly faded. She clipped her name tag back onto her chest. The M9 pistol sat in the holster on her hip. She cleaned it before attaching it. No one ordered her to go. No one stopped her. Over the command radio, Lawton simply said, "You're cleared for departure. All permissions temporarily reinstated." Julia said nothing. The helicopter lifted off into gray morning sky. Below, Phoenix Base grew smaller, but Julia's focus was already miles ahead, in the valleys where she had once operated, where she had saved lives and lost friends. Her hands moved automatically, checking gear, reviewing maps in her mind. Muscle memory from years of tactical operations that never truly left her. 2 hours later, from the forest edge, radio crackled. I have successfully made contact. Redirecting Bravo team now. Drone footage showed Julia pulling an injured soldier from the tree line. Evans. A staff officer watched without blinking. She found them alone in the red zone. But it wasn't luck. Julia moved through that terrain like she had been born there. Every rock formation, every hidden path, every potential ambush point was burned into her memory. She had walked these valleys when they were battlefields. She had crawled through these forests when they were killing fields. Julia led the 3 soldiers out, left arm supporting the wounded man, right hand gripping the terrain map tightly. Not a single shot was fired during the extraction. The route she chose avoided every known enemy position, every potential choke point, every place where good soldiers had died before. She moved like a ghost through landscape that had once been her second home, a place where she had been forged and broken, and somehow found a way to keep going. When they reached the extraction point, Evans looked up at her with recognition, blood on his face, but alive. I remember you, he whispered. Julia just smiled. I told you I'd always bring you home. The helicopter arrived on schedule. Medical personnel took over, and Julia, the woman who had just completed an impossible rescue mission, stepped back into the shadows. When she returned to base, Julia didn't go to the command center. She went straight back to the kitchen. An assistant called out to her. Julia just smiled. They're safe now, I need to wash my hands. But everyone who saw her that day noticed something different. The way she moved, the way she carried herself, the way other soldiers looked at her. She was no longer just the cook. She was someone who had walked through hell and brought people back. The silver chain around her neck caught the light differently now, no longer hidden, but worn with quiet pride. In the kitchen, Julia returned to her routine, preparing meals, cleaning dishes, taking care of the people around her, but now everyone knew. The woman making their sandwiches was the same woman who could navigate hostile territory in the dark, who could find lost soldiers when satellites couldn't, who could bring people home when everyone else had given up. Type, one last time is enough if you've ever seen someone who just needed one chance to fix their entire past. 1 day later, Lofton called the briefing room back to order. No one spoke when Julia entered with the tea tray. Lofton looked at everyone, then pointed at the screen. This is the new extraction route, proposed by our kitchen staff. No one dared to laugh. Lofton stepped forward, removed a Raven 9 badge from his chest pocket, placed it on the table. The only person who wore this saved this unit. Julia stood still, didn't take the badge. I just did what was right, and they're still my unit. The room remained silent. Officers who had joked about her just days before now looked at her with something approaching respect. A young soldier stepped forward, stammering, I apologize for joking around the other day. Julia smiled gently, nodded. Just remember that lesson. That's enough. She looked around the room, at faces that had changed from mocking to respectful, at maps that now showed routes she had drawn, at a command structure that had made space for someone they had dismissed. I don't need recognition, she said quietly. I just need to know that when someone calls for help, we answer. The Raven 9 badge sat on the table between them, a symbol of service, of sacrifice, of operations that officially never happened. Julia picked up her tea tray, turned to leave. At the door, she paused. And gentlemen, next time you see someone in an apron, remember that they might be the reason you're still alive. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Lieutenant Colonel Lawton picked up the badge, studied it. Then he looked at his officers. Any questions about protocol? He asked. No one had any questions. Type. She's not just a cook. If you also believe there are people who save entire units, then go back to washing dishes like nothing happened. There are people who seem ordinary, but carry memories that others couldn't bear. Julia didn't need praise. She didn't return for glory. She returned because someone who had survived thanks to her was trapped once again, and this time she wouldn't let them be left behind. Never judge someone just because they're holding a spoon instead of a gun. They might be the reason you're still alive today. Some people operate in the shadows, not because they're hiding, but because that's where the real work gets done. They don't need headlines. They don't need recognition. They just need to know that when someone calls for help, someone will answer. Julia Rains returned to her kitchen, to her routine, to her quiet life. But everyone who knew her story understood that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear aprons.
Not everyone wears military ranks, but there are people who once stepped out from the line between life and death, then silently returned to cook breakfast for the entire unit. If you've ever seen an ordinary person do extraordinary things, if you believe that sometimes the quietest person holds the key to survival for the entire group, leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe to the Veteran Story channel. We tell these stories so that names like Raven 9 never disappear.